This is Problem Solved, the IISE podcast, where we talk to industrial and systems engineers about their work, ideas, and solutions.
Hello, and welcome to Problem Solved, the IISE podcast. I'm Keith Albertson, managing editor of ISE Magazine here at IISE. Today, we're going to talk about ergonomics from A to Z, both in terms of the many challenges ergonomists faced in the past year when the COVID-19 pandemic forced workplaces to adapt, but also a look at how these changes will affect the future of workplace safety. We've explored these topics in the March issue of ISE Magazine, and you'll hear more about them at the upcoming Applied Ergonomics Conference set for March 22nd through 25th. Our guests are Gary Allread, Program Director for SRI Ergonomics at The Ohio State University. He is the newly elected President of the Applied Ergonomics Society. Also joining us is Ben Zavitz, President and Chief Ergonomist for Ergo Human Performance and the current President of AES. Gentlemen, welcome. Before we talk about the various ways ergonomists have adapted in the past year, and there have been quite a few, it's been a constant discussion, I know, among those in AES. Tell us about your own experiences. We've all had to deal with this in some way or another. Tell us about how you had to adjust your own work habits and schedule and how it affected your teams. Ben, we'll start with you.
All right. Thanks, Keith. Really excited to do this podcast with Gary. I think that over the last year, it's been definitely a challenge for a lot of us, especially balancing that whole, work, life, family dynamic. Everybody's at home, both spouses are working, kids are doing remote learning, they're at schools. It's created a lot of challenges, everything from, physical office spaces, do we have desks, do we have chairs, good ergonomic setup, Wi-Fi, bandwidth issues, there's privacy issues with rooms with doors. You have kids needing assistance and parents acting as, teachers while they're trying to work. So that's created a lot of challenges, at least within my home environment here. So a few things we've learned is, to be more flexible and kind of build these disruptions into your normal daily routine. So one of the challenges with that is you need to kind of adjust your hours of work, right? So your traditional, 9 to 5 work hours has expanded to hours beyond that, maybe before that, to build these, disruptions into that workday.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith. I concur a lot with what Ben was talking about. I think with me, my work schedule, I felt that I was pretty regimented in how I did my pre-COVID work. And I think I've learned a lot about also how to be more flexible in balancing work and life, and how I think it has really helped my own mental health to be able to, mix up some personal activities within my workday. And perhaps my workday is longer than it was, but it balances out in terms of the way in which I've been able to really, be much more flexible. And I've really kind of enjoyed it. I've gotten used to working from home and having this balance and pretty comfortable with it. So I think for me, it's going to be a challenge if and when I go back to working in the office full time or close to full time.
And for ergonomists, it's the double-edged sword because you have to deal with your own situation, but you're also, as ergonomists do, help other people with their workplace situation. And that's posed many, many challenges. We've heard about how difficult it is to do so remotely. Tell us about, just from an ergonomist standpoint, how do you keep people safe? How do you help them do the things they need to do when you can't be right there with them and observe what they're doing as the usual practice?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Keith. Right. So as ergonomists, we're used to that face-to-face interaction, right? We physically go out into a workplace, we interact with folks, we observe what they're doing. And now with COVID, we can't do that. So how do we, best keep people safe when we can't be there present? So I think one thing that we're kind of seeing is maybe a trend is more embracement of technology, right? People are working remotely. So there's also online coaching, there's interactions are becoming more common. So as an example, we can't go on site to collect data, but so what can we do, right? Can we use some sort of video conferencing technology and have somebody else collect that data with us, where we could remote in and almost be a coach. And you ask them to, take different views of a workplace, or, ask questions of employees and try to collect that data for us, where we coach them along the way. So we're seeing a lot of that right now, where people are using that sort of approach to, to do ergonomic evaluations remotely.
And I see this as really an opportunity. One of the services that my organization provides is education and training for professionals. And so we host ergonomics training, which has been at our university. And now we are transitioning to remote distance learning through technology platforms. And in developing that and transitioning pretty well established training curriculum to, a digital format actually has opened up a lot of opportunities. I'm really excited, even though we may not be interacting in person. I think that the training opportunities for teaching ergonomic principles is going to be just as powerful through this remote technology, and really allows us to, I think, develop some more personalized ways to, transfer this knowledge to, actual participants' needs. And so I'm excited about the ability to do this type of service, to provide this education for ergonomists in a new way.
Yeah, it sounds like the IISE practice of continuous improvement that you're learning from the situation. Is there anything that really surprised either one of you? Something that you learned from this experience that maybe that you didn't expect, but that is going to be very useful going forward?
Yeah, I think for what I had just mentioned is probably my biggest surprise, is really a lot of trepidation I had about developing a remote course that will be useful, I think, in this age of COVID. But afterwards, I really felt that, this training that we've developed would suffer as a result. But I think it actually can be just as good, if not better. Yeah,
and to kind of piggyback on that, I think the digital training is really important, and it's going to take a different approach. It's compared to live training, where people actually have to show up in a classroom. They're 100% engaged. That's always been a challenge, where people are trying to balance work, especially if you do training on site at the company. They're checking their emails, they're responding to things. They're not really 100% engaged in the training sometimes. And I think with this digital platform, it gives people flexibility to do that training kind of on their schedule. Right. So maybe they could take, I'll call it chapter 1 of the training, put everything aside, and then come back to chapter 2 at a different time. Yeah, maybe even a different day. So they can get this learning kind of on their own schedule. The other thing, too, I think with technology is, there's a lot of AI, a lot of wearable technology. It's sort of the sexy thing right now. Everybody's talking about it prior to COVID. But I think now with COVID, that may change. And kind of what I'm predicting is that you're going to see a lot more of that at a lower level. So we can use video, we can do AI assessments from video to screen jobs without having your ergonomists go out and do all this work. Same thing with wearable technology. I'm envisioning that the technology is going to become cheaper. You're going to have simpler wearable devices that can also collect some of this, basic level screening of jobs to help kind of prioritize where those jobs are. And then the ergonomists can come in after the fact and using that data to really do a deep dive into the problem jobs, if you will.
When it comes to home office or office adjustment, which so many of us have had to deal with, as you mentioned, we have the physical side. Our offices are all designed for our safety and comfort. We have desks and chairs and lighting and ventilation that are all part of the work environment. Now you've got people going to all their various homes where every environment's different. There's no standards. And in addition to trying to get the physical workplace better for people, they're having to deal with mental and emotional issues. And Ben, as you mentioned, there's so many distractions, children and pets and people teaching from home. How do you deal with the mental aspects of helping employees go through this, which I guess in some ways is probably a lot harder, isn't it?
not that necessarily harder. I think that as ergonomists, we need to look at work situations holistically, which involves addressing, physical issues as well as cognitive or mental or psychosocial issues. And when we've talked a lot about setting up home workstations, I think that our default for many of us has just been focusing on one aspect of that, which has been, the physical setup. But holistically, we should be dealing with, the perceptions and the mental aspects of remote work and how it impacts individuals in some ways differently. I think any set up any recommendations or guidelines that are given for appropriate home workstation setup should include these perceptions and how people are going to psychologically react to the work as well as physically.
Yeah, I agree with that too. That the whole human interaction piece is really missing with this remote work. People are used to going to the offices, going out for lunch, going to conference rooms, even getting away from their desk. They go to a meeting, then they come back to their desk. And now, if I can use the term, we have death by Zoom call, right? You're just constantly sitting in front of your computer. It's meeting after meeting, and there's no movement. There's no sort of that human interaction, and there's, no up and down and that sort of thing going on, which creates a lot of challenges. The constant sitting, obviously, but also a lot of the vision type issues, right? You're constantly staring at the same screen all the time at the same distance. So I'm seeing some things like that where people are having, vision problems and, headaches and some of these other things. So I think, like Gary mentioned, is how do we build that social piece back into it? Is there ways around that where companies can start to build that into part of the workday and create that sort of atmosphere of how do we get that human interaction back into this remote world that we have?
And some managers I've seen have done a good job at that by scheduling perhaps, virtual coffee breaks or virtual happy hours or other things that in a normal world, office colleagues would be doing to address the social issue and ways to use technology to try to simulate that in some way, probably to varying levels of success. But I think it is reflective of really ways to try to incorporate that social aspect into remote work.
And a lot of this may be here to stay. I mean, we've seen various surveys show how a lot of people like working from home, and many businesses are allowing employees to do this on a much greater scale than before. Are we going to see this even once the pandemic has faded to some point where there are a lot more people working from home? And if so, how do ergonomists and sort of the ergonomics industry adjust to that to help people do a better job of it, to pick out the right kind of office and to deal with all these problems? Is this going to be a whole kind of aspect of ergonomics in the future?
I think it is. I think remote working from home is here to stay. As you already mentioned, some of the surveys and some of the data that we're seeing is, people want to work from home, at least 2 days a week, maybe more in some cases. And I have some companies I work with where, engineers and other folks will literally go into the workplace, get the information they need, and then come back to home and then, do sort of the heads down work at home, where they're finding they're very productive with less distractions, with people walking around and that side of it. So I think one of the things that comes up is, this whole home, office workstation setup is here to stay. So a lot of companies are starting to realize is, the do-it-yourself type solutions are not really going to be a long-term solution. So they're providing resources for that, whether it be, remote evaluations for you can evaluate individuals, but also standardizing on equipment and sort of setups. And here's recommended equipment for these types of setups, and really trying to coach employees through here's really what we expect of you if you're going to work from home.
Yeah, I think that this remote work, even on a part-time basis, is really analogous to what we see in organizations where they've tested 4 10-hour workdays as opposed to 5 8-hour workdays. And in many cases, that's really favored by employees because it does provide them a bit more flexibility. And I think that with this remote work, like Ben was talking about, where there is more flexibility to work from home for more days, I think that also will be viewed favorably. I think that the issue of how productive people are really is going to dictate if this becomes a long-term trend, and if managers see that they're maintaining productivity among their workers who are doing this remotely, then I think that that's something that can be beneficial in lots of different ways. I think as a way to balance work and home life. That transition, though, I think from an ergonomics perspective and a physical ergonomics perspective, really will call for more permanent solutions for equipment that is being used to make it more ergonomically friendly and comfortable. Just putting your computer on a box to raise it up isn't going to be a good long-term solution. And so I think that the recommendations that ergonomists are giving for those who are working more remotely are going to need to be a bit more involved, and companies are going to have to realize that they're going to have to invest some more into creating these home workstations that are going to be helpful for employees.
And of course, not everybody can work in an office and not everybody can work remotely. There are quite a few workers and a lot of jobs that involve having to be on site, which is a whole different challenge during the pandemic. You've got people in manufacturing, warehouses, distribution. And, in particular, we've seen with e-commerce just booming while people are shopping from home. Somebody's got to be in warehouses handling all this. And that's created new challenges there for social distancing and keeping people safe. We've also seen stories about how companies that use robotics and advanced automation are maybe accelerating that because of the lack of workers or safety for workers. And Ben, you talked about the wearables as well. How are we going to see this continue to grow going forward? Are we going to see more and more automation for these kind of on-site jobs as a way to keep people safe?
I'm not so sure yet. I'm not convinced yet that the two are that related. I think that, certainly in the short term, needing to physically separate employees to help combat the virus makes sense. I think that the issues with, assistive technology, robots and stuff, I think that's, there are other benefits if implemented correctly. There are to, production environments. And so I think that that's going to advance for a lot of reasons, irrespective of, what implications COVID might bring to the workplace.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with that too, is a lot of times we try to push automation or robots, but they have a very specific purpose, right? And generally they're good for either repetitive work that humans will break down doing, or things that humans can't do, like lifting heavy things or, different types of welding applications or whatever that may be. But just to have a robot or some technology that can do something that a human can do very easily is not necessarily the right answer, in my opinion. I think it's that balancing between, what technology do we want to use and how best do we fit it into the environment with the human interaction piece of it, and how do humans interact with technology to create these, efficient systems, whether it be in warehousing or manufacturing or wherever they may be.
Yeah, and that's something we've seen as well, that the use of AI and Industry 4.0 still needs that human touch. You can only go so far with the automation at this point, that the way humans think is obviously different from machines, and that you really need both in sort of a symbiotic way to be able to get the right amount of production. Is that right? Yes,
absolutely. Yeah, because you got to remember, like a lot of the AI is machine learning, right? So you're teaching a machine to think like a human. And humans are very complex in their thinking and processing data. So training machines to do that obviously takes time and effort, and you need that that human there to kind of almost verify, some of the things that they're seeing. So you're using the AI to empower you to get to the data quicker, but then the human can use that data to make a decision.
Yeah, and I think that at the upcoming conference, our keynote speaker, John Lee, is going to be touching on some of these issues. And so I think that, I would defer some of these questions to Dr. Lee, because I think that he'll, being an expert, on this topic specifically, will teach us a lot about how accepting humans are going to be of working more closely with automation and robotics as that technology continues to develop in the future.
And now each of you are also presenting at the Applied Ergonomics Conference. Tell us a little about the work and the research you've done and what you're going to be offering to those who are attending. I think, Ben, you had touched on some of the wearables. That's going to be one of your presentations, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah, the title of the presentation is actually Stop Observing and Start Measuring, and moving ergonomics into Industry 4.0, using AI, wearable technology, and big data. And kind of the whole gist of the presentation is we have this technology, but a lot of times we're dumbing down the technology into simple risk assessments. So what we're going to be talking about is how do we take this very vast data, and then how do we do more with it using more advanced analysis, more dynamic biomechanical modeling, and using those data sets to be more predictive. And really kind of help us pinpoint what exactly is going on here in these work environments.
Gary, what about you?
Well, when I submitted a proposal to give a talk for this year's conference, back, late summer, I was thinking that it would be interesting to talk about lessons we've learned from the pandemic, assuming that it would be well behind us by March of 2021, which is not quite the case. So I think that's been a lesson learned in itself. But also, I'm excited to give this talk because I've thought a lot about how ergonomics has been impacted, or ergonomists have contributed to the COVID pandemic, and what are some pros and cons. To me, one of the most interesting aspects as I've thought about this, and I'll be talking about it during the presentation, is thinking about, and I've looked into data on how different countries have reacted to the pandemic, how they've structured their response to the virus. And I believe that some companies have done a much better job at protecting their citizens than other countries have. And in looking at the policies and the practices that have been put into place among those countries that have had very low COVID transmission rates, I think that those policies are very reflective of a successful and sustainable ergonomics process. And so one of the things I'm talking about in my session really is how analogous some of these government policies have been to really what is been found to be, very successful ergo programs that help companies protect workers and maintain productivity.
And it's important for ergonomists and everyone to be able to share those best practices and kind of share everything they've learned. You're both members of the Applied Ergonomics Society board as the current and incoming president. Teresa Bellinger's our past president, and other members of the board. What are some of the ways AES has tried to help its members deal with this situation, share ideas, and help everyone get through it as the situation has unfolded in the last year?
Yeah, one of the things that I think that AES has done a good job of is providing information through our monthly newsletters. And, over the last year, we have provided resources for companies, highlighted the work that IISE is doing and information that they have provided. We have touched on many topics that would be helpful to our members, whether it was some of the higher level issues of transitioning to temporary homework, or as he started having employees come back to work and they may be deconditioned, how to integrate that knowledge into ramping back up to work. We've presented information in the newsletters related to the aspects of wearing masks during, working in a production environment. What are some lessons that ergonomists themselves have learned or have dealt with as they have tried to do their work in a pandemic where there have been, other priorities. Trying to reduce cumulative trauma hasn't necessarily been a priority when you're dealing with, trying to, prevent transmission of a virus. And so, how do ergonomists contribute in an environment when a pandemic is going on? So that's one way I think that AES has done a good job of trying to convey information that could be useful for its members.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. Is the newsletter is kind of seems to be the key of what AES is doing right now. Is like, as Gary mentioned, is timely topics, interviews with practitioners. Here's how they're coping with things. Here's things they're working on. Sort of those trends and how we're adapting and how we're coping with that, and really kind of where we're going, right? Where the industry as a whole is going. We're trying to stay abreast of that, and again, publish that in the newsletters. Obviously offer some webinars and things of that nature. And then the other thing we've done recently is really kind of updating the website, really trying to get, some of this knowledge that we've had over the years or we're putting together and making that available. So something as simple as the Ergo Cups, right, which is a highlight of the Applied Ergonomics Conference every year. But again, taking some of that information and making that available over the previous years to the members, so they can actually go in and look at that and search for that. And again, just trying to create that ergonomics community that, we're all in this together, right? And then there's people out here that are, probably dealing with the same things that you are. And it's just a way for people to connect with other folks that are experiencing the same things.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much for your time and your expertise. Anything that either one of you would like to add for our listeners?
I certainly hope that people listening have an opportunity to attend the conference. I think that, again, has been part of the theme of this podcast is the benefit that we can get from using technology to communicate with one another. And I think that what I've seen from the conference organizers, they put together a pretty good program here that, even though it's going to be remote, is going to be filled with a lot of really helpful information from the sessions, from the keynote, and from what Ben was saying from the Ergo Cups. So I'm certainly looking forward to the conference.
Yeah, and I would highlight that too. If everybody has an opportunity to attend the conference, this year's going to be very different than last year. I think last year a lot of companies or a lot of conferences struggled with how do you do a virtual conference? Well, it's been a year now. And so we've kind of figured that out, right? Here's the technology. This is how you can use it. This is how you can create that sort of that live conference feel. So this year we're going to use a couple different technologies, but one of them in particular lets you have meeting rooms where you can actually go in and interact with people on smaller scales, and you can come and go throughout meeting rooms. So it creates almost like a live, discussion where people can come and go and interact with very specific individuals after their talks. So that's something that's going to be definitely different and unique this year. So I'm looking forward to that and how that's going to work.
Well, we look forward to seeing both of you, and we hope everyone there coming up March 22nd through 25th. You can find out more about the conference, get the program and the schedule at iisc.org/AEC. Gary and Ben, thanks so much for being with us today and sharing your ideas and expertise. And we look forward to hearing more of you in the future. And thanks to everyone for listening.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Problem Solve, the IISE podcast, a production of the Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers in Metro Atlanta. This podcast is produced by David Brandt, Keith Albertson, and Michael Hughes, and edited by David Brandt. You can listen to all episodes of Problem Solved and learn about sponsorship opportunities by visiting our website, podcast.iise.org. You can also learn more about IISE at the Institute's website, www.iise.org.